This month, we're discussing every aspect of money because money impacts every aspect of our lives. It often determines who we will marry or divorce, be friends with, or not. As children, we saw the adults around us and their behavior around money. And we now know that our beliefs around money has been programmed at a very young age. These beliefs we picked up as children still impact our lives as adults. So obviously a discussion around psychology of money is one we need to have, and we need to understand our own psychology. Welcome to Her Second Stage, the podcast dedicated to inspiring successful women in the next stage of their lives. I'm Hilda Landerstedt, and I'm excited to share the lessons I've learned as I transitioned into my second stage. Join me on this exciting journey of sisterhood and remembering who we are at our core. Remember, no matter where you've been, the best is yet to come. Today I'm discussing women, money, and wealth with Steph Wagner, National Director of Women and Wealth at Northern Trust Corporation. Steph's journey from fast-paced world of investment banking to overcoming financial insecurity after divorce is testament of transforming challenges into opportunities. She is passionate about the psychology of money and loves discussing how women can shake up the stigma around money, steps into financial power, and cultivate the mindset of true financial independence. Steph, welcome. I'm so excited to have you and have this conversation with you.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thank you for having me. And I appreciate that intro.
That's so impressive. I'm sure there's a lot I left out. It doesn't really describe the magic of who you are, but I'm trying.
I appreciate that so much, but you're right. This is a topic that I'm very passionate about. So thank you for having this conversation.
I love saying in one of the magazines I read it where you said, instead of allowing aging to limit us, let it empower us, or let us be empowered by it. Recognizing the incredible advantages of our life experiences give us as we embark on new journeys and fulfill new dreams. And that is so apt for women in their second stage as we embark on a new stage and as we create a new life. So let's talk about money. But first, share your story that got you so passionate about money and about women and money in particular.
Well, thank you. No, it all stemmed from my personal journey. As you alluded to in my intro, I started my career in investment banking. Later on, went into private equity and, really was very comfortable around the topic of money, but not from a personal wealth perspective, right? I was doing it through my work on the corporate finance side. Well, life happened. I was suddenly pregnant with my second child. I had a 2-year-old at home. I was trying to navigate this crazy world of the demands of private equity, and something had to give. My husband at the time was traveling over 150 nights a year. And I kind of took a pause and said, this isn't conducive to the type of, environment that I want for me and my family. And so I quit. And I really began to lean out of not only my earning power, which is a whole different topic, but because of the day-to-day busyness of life, raising 2 kids, subsequently 3, ultimately I had 3 boys, life became busy and I found myself leaning more and more away from all of my financial affairs and losing that financial independence. I didn't realize it though until I faced divorce. And I kind of had that aha moment of, what did I lose? What did I step away from? How is this going to impact my future, my children's future? And I had to rebuild. I not only had to rebuild my career after 14 years out of the workforce, but equally important, maybe even more importantly, is I needed to rebuild my wealth. I really needed to learn how was I going to take any of the income that I was going to make, but really turn it into financial security long term. And that really requires a deep understanding of building a solid financial foundation for yourself, learning how to think strategically. And through that journey of rebuilding, I became very passionate about helping other women navigate this, because if I was struggling with a finance background that I had, what was the average woman who didn't have that background? How was she navigating it? And at the end of the day, and I love that you brought up longevity, because all of this happened in my late 30s, 40s. But frankly, doing this work really has helped prepare me to thrive during those later years. And that's why it's so important. And it's never too late for women, quite frankly, because to your point, we have so many chapters to live, so many chapters to create opportunities for, and having that financial security is a critical, critical step. So that's a little bit about my backstory, but really more importantly, I think why this work is so important as we look, to helping other women.
Yeah. I mean, as sad as your story is and as stressful as it must have been, there's so many women with similar stories.
Yeah. And if I could, Hilda, it's not just divorce, right? It could be loss of a spouse. It could be, even if you're married, maybe there's a loss of a career or a business that your family has that fails, or an illness, a medical crisis. There are so many other things that can happen to us that really we must be prepared to react and make good decisions in order to preserve the security for our family.
So what now, looking back, because there's a lot of women, something's got to give, like you're saying, like your husband's working, you working, the 3 kids in the middle. For a lot of women makes the decision to end their career or put their career on hold to raise their families. Is there anything they can do during that 15, 20 years that they're going to do that you want to talk to?
No, for sure. I think I approach all of this, and you're right. It was a really difficult time, and I just scratched the surface of my story. There was a lot of deep wounds and shame. You talk about the psychology of money, of how did I get into this place? Why did I even have this relationship with money that would allow me to step back? Why did I not want to have these conversations? But I don't have any regrets, because I do believe in life that everything happens for a reason. We learn from our challenges. We never succeed without walking through the fire and really having tough conversations with ourselves. But I do think there were lessons learned, to your point. And those lessons definitely centered around, and I would use those lessons as really words of caution or advice, is never, ever, ever step away from your financial power. Don't lose your economic agency. What does that mean? We can unpack that in a second. But the reality is, you don't have to be an expert at this, but you got to be in the game. You got to be participating in conversations. You've got to also know, even if you don't want to be involved on the day-to-day, who you can trust, who you can turn to. You need to educate yourself, right? So that you can make more informed decisions. But also, I really had an attitude. It was very naive. Again, I was in my late 30s when suddenly my life blew up. And my husband, after being together 20 years, announced he was in love with someone else and wanted a divorce. And I was completely blindsided. But I had always had this attitude, this could never happen to me. I didn't really appreciate life and the journey of life, and that life happens. It's not all planned perfectly. Just when we think we have it figured out, we have curveballs that we talked about. And so, having said that, and knowing the statistics out there, the fact that because of widowhood, because women outlive men, because of the rise of the Great Divorce, because of anything else that can happen, it is so important that we equip ourselves with knowledge and power to be prepared, so that when something happens, we're not reactive like I was, we're proactive. And it's that mindset that, again, ties to the emotional side of money. That's the first step. When you say, what do you need to do? Really examine the why behind your aversion to talking about money. Or even if it's not your aversion, maybe it's your partner's or your children's, or understanding the root of why money typically is such a taboo topic. And that cannot ultimately unleash the power of really taking additional steps to build that solid foundation. So, and that in and of itself is a process too that I'm happy to get into.
We born like in the 50s, born in the 60s. The 3 topics that was totally taboo was money, politics, and sex. And here we go. We in our 50s, and nobody told us 50 years later, this is the only skill you're probably going to need in your life.
Right. It's so funny you said that, because I often say we're more apt to talk about sex and politics over happy hour with friends than to say, hey, by the way, just curious, how much is your mortgage relative to your income? And I'm just wondering, what type of 529 plan do you have for your kids? I mean, I think we would never get back invited to a happy hour if we threw out those questions. What that you just said that.
Do you still see that sort of taboo that we grew up in your world, that women are still scared? It's ingrained that we're not allowed to ask questions or know almost? about?
Yeah, absolutely. And what I'm seeing that might surprise you is it's across generations. So you're speaking to, I'm in my 50s. I was born in 1970. You're speaking to kind of that 70 and or
Uh,
1970s and earlier. But frankly, I have three sons. They're all in their 20s. They all are in very serious relationships. I've had unbelievably deep conversations, given my work and my passion, with these amazing, wonderful young women. And we've talked about this, and they are just as adverse to talking about it as I was. And when we unpack why, it's because their mothers never talked about it. Their grandmothers never talked about it. And so they're just modeling the same behavior. And if you really unpack it, and if I can, I'll kind of explain the why behind it is you got to start with the fact that it builds on this false lack of confidence, this belief that we're not good at this, right? We never saw, many of us, and I'm generalizing, of course, there are many women out there that have, in fact, saw really good behaviors around money and talked about it. And so I'm not saying that this is everyone, but, the overwhelming majority, this is impacting. So it's this deep rootedness, since it's not talked about, when we saw things happen as we were growing up, because no one talked about it, we were left to interpret things on our own. And maybe not with a lot of context. We were young. So, for example, I would see and witness my mom hiding packages from my father. I would see and witness my dad handling everything and giving my mom an allowance for the most part, right? I thought that was normal. I was left to assume, well, he doesn't trust her with money, or she's doing things that he wouldn't approve of, and they're not talking about it. So we never spoke about it. That's part of the issue. Well, then as I aged, I'm now not having healthy conversations and therefore making my own set of assumptions. And generally speaking, again, women have a belief, a false belief, that men are better at money than we are. And again, that's because of how we were raised and seeing this lack of equality in terms of financial decision making. But also when you look at history, Hilda, in my lifetime, in your lifetime, we couldn't even get debt without a male cosigner. And when you go even, banks had the ability to give us debt if we didn't have a male cosigner, but charge us a higher interest rate because they thought it was riskier, that we weren't as competent, so to speak. So that gets ingrained in our heads, right? Combined with what we witnessed within our own families. And it's no wonder that we feel this lack of our own confidence that we could do it. So the first step is building awareness around what did we see? What did we do that left money messages within our heads that may not be really healthy for us? And, as in anything, money aside, the first step to change is awareness,
Yeah.
right? So I always say, everyone has a money story. Everyone has a set of beliefs that were established by watching and seeing. And when you begin to write your money story, sitting back and recognizing the why behind your behaviors today, you start to see what you need to unpack and what you need and what doesn't work for you anymore. And, I think there's tremendous opportunity because the reality is statistics show women actually make better investors. We by a pretty decent amount.
It's fascinating because we have more patience, I heard. We're not so aggressive. We have intuition.
And we're not as focused, generally speaking, on the return. We're focused on how do we do this in a way to accomplish our goals. And there's a lot of thought around it, that all that additional thought and it can help contribute to making really informed decisions when we think about our investments. Again, we're generalizing here. So it's really important to stress.
Yeah.
But do you see, and it back to the multi-generational, it's not going to change until we change.
Yeah.
It's not going to change until we have dialogue with our sons and daughters around healthy conversations they should be having with their partners or future partners.
Yeah.
Learning from our stories, being comfortable to say, here's what I did and the risk I put myself in, and here's how it didn't work for me, and here's why you need to take the action to learn. At the end of the day, the solution is all around financial literacy.
Yeah.
It's willingness to learn and not being overwhelmed by this topic, but going, all right. And I think, to be fair, Hilda, how we learn is important. I think we as an institution, as a financial service, I mean, you mentioned I work for Northern Trust. We have a whole program called Elevating Women that is centered around financial literacy. How experts teach is really important because I think too often nobody wants to be lectured at, right? No one wants to be told. We want to do it in conversation, through stories, through understanding, and in a way that meets us where we're at instead of further intimidates us by using a bunch of jargon and complicated terminology.
I think the financial world ruled by men or run by men thus far, they make it complicated so that they can be important. And because if their clients understand as much as they do, I think that's just my perception of it. But I think it's changing. But that was like men, they're trying to look important and they use these big words and they use things that feel so intimidating that women are so scared of asking more questions.
And I don't think it's necessarily a gender thing, to be honest. I've seen just as many women in the financial service industry that are really, this is their expertise and they live it and breathe it every single day. That can oftentimes confuse. I don't think the intention is I think everyone's intention is pure, but the reality is there needs to be more understanding that this is a foreign language to many people, men and women. I think the difference though is when we think about gender is men are less ashamed to speak up and say, I don't know what you're talking about. Where frankly, and I can share a personal story, Hilda, I was a financial expert. I was a vice president of a private equity fund at the time of when I leaned out of my career, as I shared, and then ultimately 14 years later was facing divorce and having been out of the workforce and having to build a team and figure out how I was going to do this on my own, but also have the support I needed. And I was out interviewing wealth advisors and investment managers. And I sat there and there was a lot of assumptions made about me because I had been in private equity. So the woman actually on the other side, I was interviewing a woman who is an unbelievable wealth advisor, so good in her field. She was throwing out a bunch of jargon, but it isn't jargon in her world. The language she uses every day, I just hadn't heard of it. In addition, she was also throwing out acronyms. And she made an assumption about me that because I'd been in private equity and very comfortable in finance, I knew what the heck she was talking about. I had no clue. And I felt so small. She thought I knew. And so instead of me standing up for myself, I thought I needed to know and I just didn't know. And I was ashamed. I left there feeling smaller than I had ever felt.
You made yourself smaller.
I did it. I should have had the confidence to say, stop. I don't know what the heck you're talking about. And that's on me. It's okay to say what we don't know. It's okay to hold other people accountable. It's okay to be vulnerable. It's important to be vulnerable in order for there to be, otherwise we're going to stay stuck. And that's not going to help anyone. It's not going to help our advisors. There be better advisors. So I just tell you that story because I experienced it personally and I did have a background.
I think most of the world, and I'm like as you said, I am generalizing because it's so amazing to see women coming into the field.
Yeah.
That was really, for the last 40 years, really male dominated. I just want to stop for a minute and give the readers a chance to just reflect on their own beliefs around money, on what Steph said so far. What has that brought up in you? What did it trigger? Did it trigger emotions? Did it trigger thoughts, memories? Just what came up for you? Because that is the start of your own awareness around the belief around money and your fear of money, fear of asking questions. And I just want to give this breather so that you can just feel it in your body right now before we go on with the conversation. Okay. And I want to talk to you about the making money and creating wealth, or the difference between money and wealth, and also abundance and prosperity. I've had one of my tantric coaches, and she talks about the pleasure of money and that abundance and prosperity is not necessarily the same thing. Abundance is having a lot, but prosperity is really creating this amazing life. So I want to talk your view around wealth, having money, abundance and prosperity.
So I love that. And so let's unpack the first. Number one, I love that you already out of the gate see the difference between making money and creating wealth, because they are two very different things. In fact, I really am really focused on the latter. But I do think, and I'll explain why here in a second, I think we're in an unbelievably exciting time for women. We are seeing more women than ever before have economic influence, right? We've got so many examples out there in Taylor Swift or Kendra Scott and these amazing founders that have created these brands or these companies that and created as a result a lot of income for themselves, a lot of wealth for themselves on the front end. We are making money as women in ways we've never done before. We have more female founders than ever before. We have more women climbing the corporate ranks and increasing their earning power. That's exciting. But what's missing is what you touched on. Overwhelmingly, those women are still abdicating the long-term financial planning and decision-making to their male partners. And that's where wealth is created, right? The front end is earning. What you do with it once it hits your bank account, to make it simple, is the other part. And if we're abdicating that, it means we're not really learning how to actually grow and preserve our wealth and to look at our net worth as really that's security. It doesn't matter what you make. It matters what you do with the wealth to create long-term financial security or to help your money earn money on money so that you don't have to do as much to earn over time. Does that make sense? So that's where I see tremendous opportunity. 56% of women today are still deferring those long-term financial decisions, the investments, the long-term financial planning, the wealth, the estate planning to their male partners. And what might surprise you is married millennials are doing it more than any other generation. And the reasons are different. They're different.
I want to understand the reasons around that, because I would think that they saw their parents and their mothers
but again, they didn't learn.
Okay.
They didn't learn how. They saw, but they didn't gain the skills to do anything about it. So the reasons are different. The traditionalists, which obviously are older than the boomers, and even we did it more because of more of that traditionalist. I mean, 65% of households in the 50s had that breadwinner to homemaker type of structure. 65% of families. Today, that is only 20%.
Really?
Right? Yes. So, but what's interesting is we're now living in an environment more than ever where we have two incomes, where we have both working parents. We are busier than ever juggling. This causes a lot of problems because every single buddy that is working needs to feel like they're always on. There's no downtime. The pressures, especially given the costs of living today, of working and working and earning, is still leaving that divide and conquer mentality. So it's, you do it. You're better at this. So even these women that are making money are still deferring because, again, it goes back to the mindset of you're better at it. And another reason is wealth is more complicated today. Way back, right? You just had a house, 401k, a pension, what else? Maybe some brokerage accounts. Today, we have crypto, we have private equity investments, we have venture capital, we have real estate investments, we have all of this stuff in our balance sheet that is more complex than the traditional retirement accounts and traditional investment accounts. Those are complex enough, but then you fold in all these other types of assets. So again, going back to that deep-rooted insecurity that many of us feel of we don't know enough, all that is exacerbated as wealth has become complex over the years. And so that divide and conquer, you can see, now you can kind of understand that, again, the reasons are different, but the problem is still the same. So I think that is huge to make that distinction that we might have economic power because we're going to control $30 trillion, but we need to make sure that we are educated, informed, ready to be good stewards of that $30 trillion. You know what I always say, and I hope this resonates, is no one wakes up one day and says, I think I'll lose my financial independence. That sounds like a great idea. No, of course not. This happens over time. Life gets busy, our situation changes, and we're all at the end of the day just doing the best we can. And that's where the call of action is. And I love that you took that pause. There is no time but today, right? There's no better time than to sit back and think, where am I? Where have I been? Where do I want to go? And what changes do I need to make emotionally, and actually tactically and strategically to better myself. And the fact that we are living longer than ever, and I love your mission and really thinking on longevity and helping women make the most, we could live. I'm 54. It is, women today that have means, which means access to good health care and to mental health support and to the physical health. We're living into our 90s on average, 10 to 14 years beyond what average women's life expectancy is, which is 80.
Yeah.
And so that means we could have 35, 40 years. There's no time like the present to take action and make the most of that. I often hear time's running out. No, it's not. It's just beginning.
We like with part of one of my other businesses, I talk about the longevity escape velocity, where for every year you're alive, you're going to live another year. So 95 is young still. We need to prepare for 105, 120. I don't know. Well, we need to have a lot of money to keep young, for that age. Talk to me about abundance, your view of abundance and prosperity, what you see in your world.
Yeah. Well, going back, so let's take abundance, right? What's the opposite of abundance? Scarcity. So let's break that down for a second, because to me, that's really a really critical conversation when you think about the psychology of money. Do you sit on the bench or do you play life big? Scarcity, which is there's not enough for all of us. I'm afraid to take risks. I'd rather, and I'll turn that into a money sense, I'd rather keep it all in cash. It's probably the worst thing you could do, right?
Right.
Because inflation, that money is worth less because of inflation and the value of what that money could do out in the real world in terms of purchasing power. But also it's costing you from what you're missing out on investing it at a higher return. But people get in that fear-based approach and that scarcity of, I can't afford to lose, but you're sabotaging yourself. Abundance is different. It's more of a growth mindset, right? It's more of a belief in ourselves that I just got to equip myself and the possibilities are endless, right? But you're right, because if you don't think of what you do with it, abundance just becomes, I want more and more and more and more and more. And and what you talked about, prosperity, really in my mind doesn't have much to do about the zeros, the number of digits, right? It's the joy. It's the peace of mind. It's the effect of the wealth that you've created and the impact that you can have. That creates prosperity, which again, too often I think we assign numbers to, I need this much to feel financially secure. It depends on what your needs are.
Yeah.
There are plenty of people that feel completely joy and peace and prosperity around money that have very little relative to someone that has a lot of zeros and doesn't sleep at night because they focused only on, I don't have enough, and they have plenty.
Yeah.
Or
that again, they don't have enough time and they're just always so busy. And like you said, there's the more, and they can't stop and smell the roses and enjoy what they've created.
It's not being off that darn hamster wheel, right? It's just constantly grind. And it's easy for us in this crazy world that we live in of, it's just life. The pressures of and I think in many ways, women experience a lot of pressure because more and more, speaking of longevity, more and more of us, even as we age, have incredible demands on us financially and physically because of being part of that sandwich generation. We're talking about us living to be 95, but our mothers and fathers could live to be. And so many of us are in a situation of, I'm going to be called, and of course, willingly help an aging parent or loved one. I could be 75 and thinking I'm in the golden years in retirement and be called to financially support my mom while maybe still financially supporting in one way, the needs of a child. That's different for everybody, but you understand we have a lot of pressure. And so having the right mindset to make sure that we are positioning ourselves to not only create wealth, by having that growth or abundant mindset and to believe in ourselves, but then also to translate that into how do we do good with that, both for ourselves and for other people to create joy and prosperity.
I want to briefly touch on the wealth transfer. I read everywhere like the biggest wealth transfer is happening, about to happen, and women is going to control. I think you just mentioned $30 trillion. So it's almost there's no option for us. We need to learn how to deal with money because we are going to control $30 trillion. It's not small. There's a lot of zeros in that.
It's a lot of responsibility and a great opportunity. If you unpack that, of course, a lot of that wealth is creation, not just all transfer through inheritance. There is creation in terms of us controlling wealth. But you're right. The overwhelming majority is inheritance, either by spouse, interspousal transfer. So that could be divorce and it's changing hands, or death and becoming a widow. And then also just natural inheritance. So that would be going to the next generation. But there is a lot of talk when we think about the great wealth transfer of the rising gen and the next generation. But no, it starts first with women because of how long we're living and what we're creating. So I'm glad you brought that up. I think it's important to note that it's not just going to the younger women, right? It's going to the older women too, because of how long we're living. And we do have a tremendous opportunity. We do have a tremendous responsibility, I think, that we put that back into the economy in ways that are making real impact.
Yeah.
Both in our purchasing power, but also I am amazed at how women are redefining philanthropy today and not just giving in traditional ways, but thinking, how do I go and support and solve for problems in the world, like this lack of funding for female entrepreneurs? In my world, I see that every day. Getting really smart about that, really learning, how do I be strategic with my investments and create more impact to solve for some of the issues that women, are facing? And that takes education. At the end of the day, it all boils down to financial literacy.
Where can women go for education? And leading with that question, where can women our age, mid-50s, heading for 60s, go? Like, where do they start? Where do you start if you've been married 25, 30 longer years, and now you're facing 60? I am. Luckily,
Yeah.
but where do you start? Like, where do you go for education?
Sure. Before you turn external, okay, and search, look internal. And you brought the first step up is understand your relationship with money today. Understanding those mental blocks, understanding the why behind your lack of comfort around this and why maybe some of your habits and behaviors need to change. Where did they stem from? What do you need to do to change that? That's number one, really understanding your relationship with money. Number two, again, this is your internal homework. Understand your money, what you have today. Understand your wealth. Take the time to really know, where does your money live? What are you unpack your accounts, everything you own, everything you owe. And I don't just mean making a list. I mean, really understanding those assets and those liabilities. What interest rate are you paying? What are the terms of them if you pay something off early? Are there any penalties? What are the different aspects of what you own? Not all assets are the same, right? So how liquid is that asset? How quickly can it be turned into cash if you needed it? Is that asset that money is sitting in? Is it being put to its highest and greatest use? Or like I mentioned, do you have too much in cash and kind of sabotaging your money's ability to grow? We could do an hour session. We could do a 6-hour session on every one of these if you really dive deep. But you can see how taking inventory is a really critical step. And it's not just what you own and what you owe. You got to understand your spending. How are you, again, it's important what's coming in, but it's more important what's going out, because if more stuff's going out than coming in, you're taking it from your balance sheet. You're either borrowing more or taking it out of an investment or savings. And too often, in fact, I think 65% of people today have no idea what they spent last month. So,
Crazy.
You're not alone if you don't know. But that's the first, though, that's your homework first. Then comes a commitment to expand your knowledge. Now I have a whole curriculum this is what you need to know. These are the 4 principles. But that aside, it's committing to learn, reading, being part of a community that talks about this. I mentioned at Northern Trust, we've created this Elevating Women community, which is centered around bringing women together, talking about these issues, talking about investing, talking about philanthropy, talking about the wealth transfer, talking about how to raise kids in wealth. Have conversation with other women, share experiences, look at outside experts. but do it in a way that drives conversation. Because if you don't have context for what you're learning, you don't have enough tools to apply it into your everyday life. And that's why I think being inspired by others, understanding you're not alone, having conversations with the right education can be incredibly, incredibly powerful. And of course, there's a lot of online resources and whatnot. But, you mentioned the magazine. I love that you're reading that. There's an awful lot of stuff out there on the web, but it's not what you read, it's how you're reading it and what you're doing with that knowledge.
You mentioned what I really love is the hardest work is the inner work. It's so much easier to just go external and absorb information, but it goes through the same filter so that you cannot really benefit from what you're learning because your filter is still putting you into scarcity or...
Correct. And I would say if you said, Steph, what is the one thing, the one tool? And I think there are many tools, so it's hard to boil it down to one. But if you said, what is the one tool that you need in your toolbox to build a good foundation, is understand how money works. Understand the concept of compounding and the earning power that money invested has if you invest it well and you let it grow. Too often pull the money out and we stop its earning power, or we're investing it in a way that's not aligned with our goals. And so there's a mismatch.
Yeah.
And it's not and that's a process. But so the overall commitment is, I want to understand how money works. I want to understand how it grows. And it boils down to understanding this concept of compound interest and compounding. And that phenomenon is powerful if invested the right way. The compounding of money, just a rule of thumb, money doubles 10 years if you let it, and that's a very high level rule of thumb. But the key is investing it so it earns that, not touching it. Yeah. And too often we just don't have the additional knowledge to understand the importance of that and how to build, off of that.
I don't know if you mentioned it, but I know you have a book coming out. Tell us about it. I know conversations you and I had, you're really passionate about your message in the book, and I can't wait to read it. So
thank you. So it comes out in November, and it's a lot about what we've talked about. We just scratched the surface, but it really dives even deeper. It's called Fly, A Woman's Guide to Financial Freedom and Building a Life You Love. And it talks a lot. I'm really open about my story and my journey of losing my financial independence. And my hope is that women, men, young girls, older, all women of all generations understand and use it as a cautionary tale. And also as a tale of, I get it. I've been in your shoes. You're not alone. And so it kind of guides you through that, my wake up call, the importance of financial independence. And then the second part, it's 7 steps. So there's a lot of story woven of how I rebuilt my wealth, but more importantly, there's a lot of tools of actionable insights on how you can build a solid financial foundation using these 7 steps, exploring your relationship with money, knowing your numbers, expanding your knowledge, creating a plan, executing that daily, and who do you hire? The last chapter, which I really love, is how do you get smart with your love life too when it comes around money? Right? Because I think so often that's a really big thing, whether it's our first relationship or a second or third relationship, whatever the case may be. We can't lose our financial power once we gain it, but we also can't shut ourselves out from the people we love. We have to learn to do that well and wisely. So I'm excited about it. And thank you for mentioning it. I'm hoping it helps many, many women across the country. It's already available online on Amazon and Barnes and Noble, and so you can Google it. And then the pub date is, so pre-orders are already available, and then it's released on November 11th, 2025. Lucky 11/11. I don't know how that happened. I was so thrilled. My couple, I said, well, okay, I'm going to go with this.
Yeah, you're going to change a lot of lives with your book.
Well, thank you. And thank you for the work you're doing. It's so important to have conversations like this across so many spectrums of topics. And, it really does take a village. It takes all of us coming together and talking, with our gifts and with our passions to really help women make the most of their lives, to make us, to help us make the most of our own life.
Do you also just want to touch on how can women get hold of you?
Please reach out. through Northern Trust Elevating Women, there's a way to, you can fill out a form and it'll connect, and you can connect and be part of our community that way. Also, I'm on Instagram, I'm on, LinkedIn. So I would invite anyone to reach out. And I must admit, I'm just building my Instagram account now. Now this book is coming out. I will tell you that my aversion to social media is probably very similar to many women's aversion to money. I'm taking my own bit of advice right now as I'm leaning in.
Really leaning in to find out what's happening.
Right. I'm leaning in and seeing, okay, I see what makes me uncomfortable. I got to go all in. So
yeah, you look pretty much like an all-in person in any case.
Well,
no.
I try.
I have questions from previous guests for future guests. So in closing, a question for you is, what do you not want anyone to know about you?
What do I not want anyone to know about me? I'm actually, no pun intended, pretty much an open book. I was with the amazing Cheryl Strayed this weekend. Unbelievable. It was one of the most powerful days of my life, I'll be honest with you. And I'm giving you this because I think it can help women. She is a woman that is all about being vulnerable and being real and having honest and real conversations to live our truest self. So I agree with her. I think it's the only way. So as a result, I try to be very vulnerable and open. So there's not much. But I do think, despite all the work, despite a big commitment that I made a long time ago when I faced betrayal from someone that I loved for so long, that rocked my world, that caused me to close up in many ways, as much as I've tried to never let that control me and to open up my heart and trust again, I will tell you, I'm still a work in process when it comes to feeling that fear of abandonment, feeling that fear of, I'm going to get hurt. And I'm still working on how I stay open, and not let that hold me back. Because in so many ways, I am so excited about the next chapter of my life. But until I let that go, that's a really big, important component that I'm still working on. And I think it's important to share because, for so many of us, we have tidbits of our lives that we haven't yet worked through that hold us back unnecessarily, but still really critically that we need to work on that.
I love your vulnerability. Thank you. Because I don't get to 55 or 60 or whatever age without that. And so many of us are hanging on to the fear of the stuff. And to me, it's like our second stage is really time to let go, because this is the time we can be free and really create the life. And
on our own terms.
On our terms, right? We can just, it's something we've done it all for everybody else. Now we can turn internally again and decide what our lives look like. I want to thank you for joining me today. And it was a really delightful conversation. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no, it was my pleasure. And thank you for the opportunity. And hope to be in conversation with you again. Again, I love the work.
I'm sure we will. Thank you.
In and of itself, you are quite an inspiration. So thank you.
Thank you, Steph.